What if I told you a 60-pound rodent has done a better job at managing water, ecosystems, and wildfires than all the government projects combined, and we tried to wipe them out? Before I get into the story, I want to start by saying this up front. I am not in the business of lectures. We've all been force-fed enough guilt about carrying the sins of our ancestors like some kind of generational group project that we didn't sign up for. That's not what this is. This is one of the most entertaining, accidentally hilarious, and genuinely hopeful stories that I've researched in a long time. But before we can get into how beavers saved civilization, we have to look back at how we screwed things up first. Stick with me, the beavers are about to embarrass us all. In the early 1900s, hunting and trapping weren't hobbies, they were survival. And beavers, well, beavers were premium. Their hides were very valuable, they were used for clothing and hats, and their dams flooded farmland. Their ponds drowned timbers that humans wanted to use to create lumber. So naturally, humans did what we do best. We declared war on the beavers. Trapping, hunting, and eradication programs proceeded. By the time we were done doing what we do, we had eradicated beavers down from about 40 to 50% of their original population down to about 2%. We'd almost made them extinct, which in hindsight might not have been our best move, because once the beavers were gone, so were their dams. Water stopped pooling and started rushing. Creeks that were once bountiful were now just erosion channels. Wetlands started drying up and mudslides started to follow. Trees died, and without trees and nowhere for the birds to land, the birds left. Then the creek beds dried, the fish died. Farmers noticed that their wells started running dry because the aquifers were just dropping. Farmlands would still flood in the spring, but then once the snowmelt was gone, the ground would dry and crack. Farmers would plow harder. And congratulations, we created the Dust Bowl. Of course, wildfire season would follow, and because there was no shade and no moisture, it turned everything into timber. There was just dry land waiting to burn. Streams would only flow with basically recycled wastewater, which was high in nitrogen, creating the best possible environment for algae to bloom. And of course, our response was concrete, steel, reservoirs, dams, and lots of bureaucracy. We spent hundreds of billions of dollars trying to do what the beavers had done naturally. Okay, lecture over. Now let's get to the good stuff. In 1948, Idaho looked around at the environmental mess that had been made and essentially figured that they needed to do something. So when there is a problem, the first thing that you do is find out what caused it. Well, that's how they got to the beavers, or lack thereof. So the Fish and Game people had trapped nuisance beavers that had been flooding golf courses and cutting down, ornamental trees. Initially, they were transporting these beavers in the back of trucks, but the beavers aren't really well designed for that. They would overheat, they would get stressed out, a lot of them died, and it was kind of cruel. So the theory was still sound, but they had to find a better way. Along the line, someone had decided that they had all these surplus World War II parachutes. So they designed these pine boxes to open when they landed. So they trapped these beavers, tied them up with rope to these World War II surplus parachutes, and then airdropped them over the Chamberlain Basin wilderness. When the boxes would land, they would pop open. If the rope failed, these are beavers, right? They chew through wood. The boxes are pine. Pine's pretty easy for them to chew through, so they didn't have to worry about, the beavers dying in the boxes. Because some beavers had already died when they were trying to transport them through trucks, they decided that they needed to test this out first. So naturally, they chose an older beaver who was kind of out of his sexual prime and used him to test this out first. They named him Geronimo because, of course, they did. So the scientists loaded Geronimo up in this plane, parachuted him out over this basin, followed him, made sure that not only did he land safe, he was able to escape the box, and then they trapped him and repeated the process like 3 times. Geronimo, tough little critter that he was, survived all 3. They eventually did not recapture him and let him go. And they watched what he did, and he survived and he thrived. And the method worked so well that it kind of became legendary. It turns out beavers don't need much orientation. You drop them somewhere with some tools to work with, and they get to work. Fast forward to Washington State. The Methow and Yakima watersheds were completely wrecked. The creek beds were dry. There was a ton of wildfire damage, and there just wasn't much left. It was pretty desolate. The ecosystem there had completely and entirely collapsed. There was nowhere for birds to land, nowhere for the water to slow and pool. So the fish were gone, the reptiles were gone, insects. It was just desert, basically. And scientists had done several projects to try to mitigate the damage, but they all failed. So they decided to do something radical. Instead of using more concrete and rebar and more human labor, they relocated some beavers. They were really curious about how the beavers were going to succeed in this area with no materials to build their dams. There's no trees left. How would they slow the water? The beavers, honestly, they improvised. They used whatever they could find. Small rocks and dry grass and small twigs were basically all they had to work with. They threw some sagebrush in, and these dams were barely 2 feet tall. But something magical happened during the spring snowmelt. Their little janky dams slowed the water and allowed it to seep into the surrounding land. It allowed the water to soak in instead of rushing away, creating more erosion. Springs rebounded. Soil moisture jumped 30 to 40% in weeks. Not years, weeks. First, the willows pushed up to the ground, and that gave the beavers something real to work with. Now that the beavers had real building material, the following years, cottonwoods pushed up to the ground. Then came the aspens, and of course, following that were birds, because they finally had a habitat. Insects and reptiles returned. The soil started to darken, meaning that life had returned. Trees grew enough that they started to offer shade, and the water cooled. Suddenly, the water temperature hit 68 degrees, which is the sweet spot for salmon eggs. And scientists continued to take measurements, and they found 4 to 5 times more salmon near beaver dams. 4 to 5 times more salmon. And then the real test came when wildfire season hit. With the beavers' dams slowing down the water and allowing it to soak in, with water pooled and more lush greenery around, when the fire spread and hit that area, it slowed. Trees were scorched, but they survived, which means they rebounded the following year. Scientists followed the next 4 to 5 serious wildfires. Only 2 to 3% of them would burn in beaver-managed areas. Meanwhile, humans had spent tens of billions of dollars on reservoirs and dams, but those didn't even come close to the level of protection offered by these little rodents that we had tried to eradicate. Human projects, tens of billions of dollars. Relocating beavers, 2 to 3 grand. Farmers, once the arch enemy of the beavers, now respected them because their wells were no longer running dry. With the aquifers raising, farmers did not have to worry about how they were going to either irrigate or feed their livestock. This was saving farmers around 5 grand a year, and money talks. In 2021 alone, 240 beavers were released. 64% of those had established territory. They made it. They continued to breed. The result of their success was that moose returned. The elk followed, then minks and muskrats. Over 100 species began to thrive in a once desolate area. But we found out that the beavers did something more magical than that. In 2011, Canada had an oil spill. Responders found something unexpected. Beaver dams had trapped the oil, preventing further spread. In the Chesapeake Bay area, beaver wetlands filtered nitrogen pollution, reducing algae blooms by 45%, something that would have cost humans millions. And this isn't just an American story. In May of 2025, the Czech Republic, after spending $30 billion on failed human projects, did something radical. They released beaver pairs. No machines, no concrete, just beavers. Within months, wetlands had rebounded. Crayfish had returned, and the frogs came back. During the hot, dry summer months, wetlands held 15 to 20% more water. So let's say this plainly. A 60-pound rodent with no meetings, no permits, no PowerPoint presentations, has proven more efficient and more effective than decades of human planning, indicating that maybe we should have left the beavers alone to begin with. And this isn't about blaming the past. It's not about pretending that humans are the villains of every story. It's more about humility. Sometimes the solution isn't always more technology. Maybe sometimes it's remembering that nature has already found the solution. We just bulldoze the answer. So maybe we should learn in the future that we shouldn't conquer the environment. Maybe it's knowing that we need to get out of the way. Because if a beaver can fix what we broke, what else might we be underestimating? And that is why we question everything. Hey, if you're still here, I want to thank you for sticking in with this story. If you like this kind of storytelling, please consider liking and subscribing. It really does help the channel. It tells the algorithm that storytelling like this still matters.